You know that feeling sometimes? When a group or an organization, even one with really good intentions, just feels a bit stuck.
Yeah, like they're just treading water.
Exactly. Focused on, keeping things going, maintaining things, maybe adding a few people here and there. It just feels stationary.
Right.
But then you hear these other stories, right? Places that somehow break out of that. They shift from just like maintenance mode to really multiplying, sparking something that just grows and moves way beyond where it started.
A real movement.
That's it. That transition from feeling kind of static to becoming this dynamic movement, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some really fascinating source material here, powerful stories, real-world examples, and some sharp insights from different parts of the world about how this transformation can actually happen.
And our goal here, our mission in this deep dive, is to really unpack these sources together. We're looking at specific churches, specific groups that made that shift and saw, remarkable growth. But not just adding numbers to a building, right?
Right.
It's about seeing disciples actually reproduce, seeing groups multiply in ways maybe nobody expected.
So digging into the how and the why.
Exactly. We want to pull out those core principles, figure out what made these transformations tick, and see what you, listening, might be able to learn from them.
Sounds like a really interesting journey. Let's jump into these sources and see what nuggets we can find about moving from church as maybe a place to movement as a real force.
Great.
So maybe to set the stage, one of the sources kicks off with a really powerful quote. It's from Leslie Newbegin.
Yes.
He said, "An unchurchly mission is as much a monstrosity as an unmissionary church." What does that tell us, especially in the context of the material we're looking at?
Well, it's striking, isn't it? What the sources pull from that is this deep, interconnectedness. The church's identity, who it is, and its outward mission, they're not separate things.
Okay, not just an activity it does.
Right. It's not just an optional program. Newbegin's point, and what the sources highlight, is that the church isn't fully being the church if it's not actively missionary. It's fundamental.
And the other way around, too. Mission needs the church.
Exactly. Mission disconnected from that body, that community, loses something vital. So the stories we're about to dig into, they're really examples of what happens when churches lean into that core identity, when they become, unashamedly missionary.
That really reframes it. It's DNA, not just a department.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's look at our first real-world example then. The source introduces us to Kwesi Young.
Yes, and Global Harvest Family Church International in Charlotte, North Carolina.
And it's described as a small church.
Yeah, relatively small, primarily folks who were African immigrants.
But their vision wasn't small.
Not at all. They really wanted to make disciples, plant churches, both back in West Africa, where many were from, but also right there in the U.S.
And they brought someone in to help, Jeff Sundell.
Right. He came in, and their Wednesday night prayer meetings actually became these dedicated training sessions.
Training in what, specifically? What were the basics?
Well, the real core stuff. How to share your own story, your testimony, how to share God's story from the Bible. And then this really practical skill, how to find what they call people of peace.
Okay, so someone who's open, spiritually curious, maybe willing to host a gathering.
Exactly. So when God is prepared. Simple tools, but then they hit a pretty significant challenge, didn't they?
Yeah, the source points this out clearly. This church of African immigrants was right in the middle of an African-American community.
And the source calls it a huge cultural divide.
A real barrier.
No doubt. And there's this very vivid story the source shares about Kwesi's first attempt to bridge that gap.
Okay.
He sees this group of young African-American men, and, the source says to him they looked intimidating. Dreadlocks and intimidating looks is the phrase used. And he admits he felt scared.
Wow, I can picture that. Facing his own fear, stepping way outside his comfort zone. So what did he do?
Well, he knew he had to, right? He's the pastor. His people are watching him. So even though he was afraid, he just walked right up to them.
Bold.
Introduced himself, and then asked what the source calls the miracle question.
The miracle question?
Yeah, basically, if God could do a miracle in your life today, what would it be? And can I pray for you?
Just like that, putting himself right out there. What was the reaction? Did they shut him down?
You might think so, but no. Amazingly, 2 of the guys were actually open to it. Yeah. One needed prayer for a job. The other had some kind of issue with his girlfriend. So Kizzy prayed for them right then and there. And then he shared his own story, shared the story from Luke 7, the woman weeping at Jesus' feet, explained how they could know Jesus.
And the immediate result.
This is key. The immediate outcome wasn't just a nice conversation. Two people agreed that night to host what they called Discovery Bible Studies, these simple, reproducible Bible studies in their homes.
Wow. That same night, so the simplicity of the method plus the courage, it just opened doors immediately.
Exactly. And the source follows up on one of those young men, Ace.
What happened with him?
Apparently, he just couldn't get Kwesi's story out of his head. And later, both he and his girlfriend, Tahita, they gave their lives to Christ.
Amazing. And this wasn't just a one-time thing for Global Harvest.
Oh, no, not at all. Kwesi and the church members kept going back. They called it loving loud.
Loving loud.
Yeah, sharing food, praying for people's needs, sharing the gospel, and just consistently starting these Discovery Bible studies in homes. And a really key part of their strategy was challenging the new believers, like Ace and Tahita, to be the ones reaching their own community, their own networks.
Passing it on immediately. Multiplication built in.
Right. And the source gives another pretty dramatic example of their persistence. They actually went into a Hispanic community during, like, a mini riot.
Seriously, with fighting and police.
Yeah, fists flying, police present. And even in that chaos, they were still walking up to people, asking the miracle question.
That takes some serious commitment. Wow.
It really shows their dedication. And Kwesi's personal motivation for this kind of, relentless persistence is rooted in his own history. The source shares this powerful story.
From Ghana.
Yeah, about missionaries coming to his village. The first group came, they all died from disease. Another group came, they died too.
Oh my goodness.
But more kept coming. They just didn't give up. And eventually they reached his grandfather, who became a Christian and a key leader in the church there.
So that history of perseverance is deeply personal for him.
Deeply. And it fueled his declaration, which the source quotes. That's what we're going to do. We will keep going to this community. One African, two Africans, whatever it takes, we will not stop.
That really sums up that theme of persistence, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That tenacity, combined with those simple, reproducible methods, it's a powerful takeaway. Even with big cultural hurdles, environmental challenges, they focused on equipping their people to just go, make disciples, and found God had prepared people in really unexpected places.
Okay, let's shift gears now. From that small, courageous immigrant church to a very different scene. A large, established church, the Lighthouse in Cape Town, South Africa.
Right. And the story, as the source tells it, starts in this almost like cinematic way. David Brudrick, sitting in the Cape Town airport back in 2009.
Just waiting.
Yeah, basically waiting for God to show him what to do next. He'd been moving around South Africa for years, training believers, kind of looking for where God was really moving, and feeling, frankly, a bit weary of churches he saw as maybe stagnant and ingrown.
So he's at the airport, no plan for Cape Town.
Just praying. And then, totally out of the blue, an email lands in his inbox. Someone in Cape Town found him online, wants to talk about these disciple-making movements.
Wow. God just opens a door right there. So he starts training some people in Cape Town, ordinary believers.
Exactly. And through that initial training, a connection is made to Peter Snyman,
who leads the Lighthouse, one of the biggest churches in the city.
That's the one. Now, interestingly, the source mentions David was initially pretty reluctant to work with existing established churches.
Why was that? Bad experiences.
Yeah, he'd had some discouraging experiences before. But the woman from his training who knew Peter, she was persistent. And it turned out Peter Snyman was wrestling with his own kind of holy discontent.
Even though the Lighthouse had this amazing history.
Right. They'd done pioneering stuff, opening doors to all races during apartheid. They had a real heart for global missions. But Peter felt frustrated. Their large institutional structure just wasn't reproducing disciples effectively in the unreached parts of the world.
So different contexts, but a similar hunger for something more, maybe, for multiplication.
I think so. That first meeting between David and Peter was, positive, but nothing concrete came out of it right away. A whole year goes by. Then that same woman contacts David again, pushes him to reconnect with Peter. And crucially, the source notes that around the same time, God was personally challenging David.
Challenging him about what?
About having faith that DMMs, these disciple-making movements, where disciples make disciples who form simple churches, leading to that rapid generational growth.
Right, the multiplication.
God was challenging David to believe that this could actually happen through existing churches, not just outside them.
So shifting his own perspective, too. Okay, so back they go, meeting number 2, a year later, and Peter's still skeptical.
Very.
Yeah.
The source says he was really upfront, told David flat out, look, I don't think the lighthouse can do this DMM thing. We've tried so many initiatives, they fizzle out, people are tired.
That's honest. How did David respond to that?
Well, feeling God's nudge, he was incredibly bold. He basically said, "You're wrong, and I'll tell you why." Yeah. And then he spent the next hour just painting this vision, a vision for reaching the entire city of Cape Town. And the source points out he didn't walk in with some pre-baked 10-point plan. The strategy actually emerged right there in the conversation.
Okay, so what was it? What finally clicked for Peter? What grabbed his attention?
It was the sheer simplicity. The simplicity of the Discovery Bible Study Method, DBS.
Again, DBS.
Yeah. The source calls it the linchpin. Why? Because it was something Peter could actually see his people doing. It felt, doable, not some complex program only experts could run.
That makes so much sense. Find that simple, practical first step people can actually take. Okay, so Peter's in. How do you even begin to roll this out in a church that size? Thousands of people.
Well, they did it strategically. First, Peter shared the vision with his core leadership team, the pastors, the elders. Significantly, his parents, who founded the church, were part of that. That couldn't have been easy.
Getting the founders on board is huge.
Absolutely. Then they expanded it to a wider circle of leaders, influencers in the church, and then they opened it up to the whole congregation.
How? Like in a service?
Yeah. The source says about 2,000 people got an initial taste, an introduction to the training in a main service, and out of that, 300 committed to the full, more in-depth training.
So making it widely available, but then filtering down to those really ready to commit. And the goal of that training wasn't just learning stuff.
Definitely not. The explicit goal was find the people ready for action, form them into teams, help them actually get started making disciples, assist them when they hit roadblocks, and ultimately mobilize them to reach people the church, in its normal way of operating, would probably never connect with.
It sounds like finding those key people, those early adopters, is really critical. The source mentions they're kind of unpredictable.
Totally.
Yeah.
And they can sometimes frustrate the leaders trying to keep things stable, even as they themselves are frustrated by the lack of progress. David, having trained like tens of thousands by then, says you just cannot predict who's going to grab this and run with it.
So what do?
You train widely.
Yeah.
You make the tools available, and then you watch. You see who actually starts doing it. Those are your early adopters. Their action validates the vision.
And David committed to stick around.
Wow.
To mentor Peter.
Yeah, a 2-year commitment, walking alongside Peter and the church through what they knew would be a major and potentially bumpy transition.
Because change like this isn't easy, especially in a big institution.
Not at all. There was resistance, caution.
Oh.
But the leadership did something wise here, according to the source. They didn't try to force everyone into being a frontline multiplier.
Okay.
Instead, they focused on helping people find ways they could contribute. Maybe through prayer, maybe through financial support, maybe helping organize things, shifting the focus back to the gospel's power, not just the methodology.
But they definitely empowered those who were ready to go.
Oh, absolutely. They formed a pioneer team, staff, interns, volunteers in the congregation, and really released them. Go share the gospel, go make disciples, go train others. And then something crucial started happening.
What was that?
Stories started coming back. Stories from the field, from these teams.
And the source says that's what started to change things for the rest of the church.
Exactly. It melted the resistance, the indifference, seeing actual lives changed, seeing God using ordinary people with these simple methods. It builds faith like nothing else.
So it wasn't that the entire church suddenly started going out into the streets.
No, not physically. But the source emphasizes the entire church became supportive of those who were going.
Yeah.
That's a huge cultural shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And these DBS groups started multiplying.
All over the place. First, maybe within the church family, then with friends and relatives far from God, and then, significantly, with those people of peace, people they had no previous connection with.
And the simplicity meant it could spread to really diverse groups.
Incredibly diverse. The source lists examples. Somali refugees, women trapped in prostitution, people struggling with drug addiction, gang members, people highly unlikely to just walk into the lighthouse building on a Sunday morning.
Wow.
And stories like, farm laborers over an hour away, walking in the blazing heat to start groups among their own people. They even turned down rides sometimes because they wanted to take full ownership. They started leading and funding their own new churches.
That's real ownership. The source mentioned some other really standout examples too, like during the 2010 Soccer World Cup, in that temporary settlement, Blickiesdorp.
Yeah, Tin Can Town.
Yeah.
They went in, and within 30 minutes, they found a person of peace, started groups right there among the homeless. And when those people eventually moved back to their original communities, they took the DBS method with them and started reproducing it there.
Amazing ripple effect. And the story of the little girl.
Oh, that one's incredible. An 8-year-old girl from a really rough neighborhood. She sees her dad leading a DDS and just says, hey, I can do this.
An 8-year-old?
Yep. Starts working with other kids in the local park. And the source notes, 2 years later, she was still making disciples and bringing her disciples to leadership gatherings.
Unbelievable. That shows how simple and reproducible this can be.
It really does. And groups popped up in workplaces, too. Even at police headquarters, started by a high-ranking female officer. Peter, the leader at the lighthouse, is apparently tracking about 180 groups they directly mentored, and some of those are already third and fourth generation.
That's real multiplication. Organic, spreading growth.
It is. And the final piece of the lighthouse story, according to the source, is David challenging Peter again.
What was the challenge this time?
Basically, okay, you've seen this work in your church, now you need to give it away to other churches in the city.
And Peter agreed.
He did. He committed to building a coalition of churches across Cape Town, all pursuing these DMM principles. They started meeting monthly, sharing struggles, sharing lessons, holding each other accountable, and strategizing about reaching unreached areas together.
So multiplying the movement beyond just one church.
Exactly. And now, David Brudrick rarely even visits Cape Town anymore.
His job there is done.
In the best way possible, yeah. Peter is now his peer, training and coaching others. It really underscores that concluding thought from the source. Movements multiply. Movements move. It's about releasing life that reproduces itself.
That is such a powerful arc. Okay, from a large church transforming itself, let's look at a slightly different model. A megachurch acting as a catalyst.
Right, and as the saying goes, everything's bigger in Texas.
So we're heading to Houston.
Sugar Creek Baptist, a church of about 4,000 people.
And also in a really diverse area, right?
Incredibly diverse. Fort Bend County, where they're located, is now majority ethnic minority. And Houston itself is a huge center for refugees. People from Burma, Bhutan, Nepal, all over.
Okay. And the missions pastor there is Don Waybright.
Yes, and he has this dual focus, both global mission and very intentional local mission.
The source mentions their global work, Honduras, Peru, the Amazon, North India. But locally, they did something specific with the refugee population.
They did. They invited a team from the Keystone Project, which focuses on disciple-making movements, to come and specifically work among the refugee communities right there in Houston.
And Sugar Creek supported this team.
Yeah, significantly. Provided support for the team to actually move into the high-density apartment complexes, where something like 50,000 refugees live in just a few square blocks. They started engaging people from Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist backgrounds.
And what were the results?
Pretty stunning, according to the source. Around 300 converts, multiple streams of discipleship going down to the 4th generation, 6 healthy new churches planted among the refugees, and one of those is already a 2nd-generation church plant.
That's significant multiplication. Now, the source raises a really interesting question here.
Why not just bring them into Sugar Creek? Question.
Exactly. For a big church like that, it seems like the obvious thing to do. But the answer isn't just about practical things like language or transportation.
Although those are factors. But the most important reason, the source says, was intentionality. They wanted these new believers to take ownership from the very beginning, to take responsibility for forming and reproducing churches within their own communities, their own cultures.
So it's about enabling that indigenous multiplication right away, not trying to assimilate everyone into the existing structure.
Precisely. Shifting the focus from just addition to the big church to multiplication from the new believers themselves.
That's a key strategic difference. The source gives another example too, doesn't it? Something at the University of Houston.
Yeah, they planted a church right there on campus, but conceived of it as an incubator.
An incubator? For what?
The idea was reach students, yes, but then specifically mobilize them for mission, both on campus and beyond. And right next door to the university is Houston's 3rd Ward.
Which is known for being a pretty marginalized, historically challenging neighborhood.
Exactly. And the insight here is that the students reached through the incubator church are now the ones actively going into the 3rd Ward, planting 1st and 2nd-generation churches right there among the residents.
And Sugar Creek supported this directly.
Yeah, they even released one of their staff members to lead that university incubator initiative full-time.
So you see this pattern again, intentionally releasing people, resources, even staff, specifically for these multiplication efforts in different contexts.
Definitely. And It extends into some really unexpected places, like the prison system around Houston.
Wait, multiplication happening inside prisons?
Yeah. The source talks about inmates who came to faith through the ministry, starting to reproduce disciples in simple churches right there behind bars.
Yeah.
The example given is the Darrington Maximum Security Prison. Apparently, the results were so positive, the prison authorities actually asked Sugar Creek to replicate the program in all 26 prisons in the Houston area.
That's incredible validation from the prison system itself.
It's amazing. And they're not ignoring the suburbs either. They're training young families within Sugar Creek to reach their own neighborhoods, start multiplying groups in these new housing developments, hoping these groups will maintain some connection back to the main church body.
So it's not just one strategy. They're fostering these diverse streams of multiplication refugees, university students, inner-city neighborhoods, prisons, suburbs.
Exactly. And Don Waybright, the missions pastor, isn't just focused inward. He's involved in wider learning communities, and Sugar Creek is sending out its own people as trainers to help equip other churches across the U.S. to do similar things.
It really shows how a large, well-resourced church can become this powerful hub, this catalyst, sparking multiplication way beyond its own immediate congregation.
A very different model, but achieving similar multiplication outcomes.
Okay, one more case study. This one takes us to Melbourne, Australia, Crossway Church.
Another large church, similar size to Sugar Creek, about 4,000 people.
And Crossway was already pretty active in missions, right? Traditional missions.
Oh, yeah. Planting churches the conventional way, supporting, I think the source says, over 50 missionaries globally. Very missions-minded already.
But then they did something new. They helped start a whole separate entity.
That's right. A new mission organization called Praxis, specifically focused on fostering disciple-making movements. DMMs.
Okay, so how did that come about? The origin story is interesting.
It really is. It starts with Dave Lawton, who was actually a senior leader at Crossway, and his wife Colleen. And they started using their days off.
Their days off, not church time.
Yeah, their personal time, just walking the streets in the western suburbs of Melbourne, praying, looking for those people of peace.
Wow, that's grassroots initiative, even from someone in leadership.
Totally. And they found people, started DBS groups in homes. But pretty quickly, Dave ran into a classic problem.
Too much to do.
Exactly. He couldn't keep up with his demanding pastoral responsibilities at Crossway and give the time and energy needed for this new DMM work that was starting to take off.
Now, for a lot of senior pastors, the temptation might be, okay, Dave, you got to choose or scale back the new thing. But the source highlights a really different response from his senior pastor, Dale Stevenson.
This is a crucial moment. Instead of asking Dave to step back or resign, Dale rewrote Dave's job description.
Rewrote it.
To do what?
To match the unfolding vision to multiply disciples. Basically, making the DMM work his primary focus within the church structure.
That's a huge institutional signal, isn't it? Embracing the new vision at the highest level.
Massive. And it wasn't just Dave's role. Crossway as a whole began to reshape its church planting priorities, shifting from just starting traditional churches to actively trying to spark these multiplying movements.
So the whole church structure started adapting.
Right. And others got inspired, joined Dave and Colleen. Praxis started to grow as an initiative. Dave's vision expanded too, beyond just the western suburbs. He started thinking about walking cities and towns all across Australia, and eventually internationally. The source mentions plans for Hungary, Spain, Japan. And Crossway backed this expansion.
Fully. Provided financial support, logistical help, oversight, accountability. And crucially, when Crossway members or even staff felt called to join Praxis full-time, they were released with the church's blessing.
That's a healthy sign, not seeing it as competition.
Exactly. The source makes a point of saying Crossway embraced this new mission entity. They didn't see it as something that would, deprive them of funds and people, but as a vital part of fulfilling their overall mission, a partnership.
And Praxis eventually became its own separate organization.
Yeah, it developed its own governing board, independent structure, funding streams, but it continues to partner very closely with Crossway and now other churches too. It's grown significantly. The source mentions over 150 volunteers and 12 full-time staff who raise their own support.
So the insight here is maybe that sometimes, for this kind of focused exponential multiplication work, launching a separate, dedicated entity with the mothership church's full backing and blessing might be the most effective way, rather than trying to contain it all within the existing structures.
That seems to be the key takeaway from the Praxis story. Recognizing that a different kind of engine might be needed for that specific DMM focus, and strategically birthing it and supporting it rather than trying to force it into the existing mold.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground. A small immigrant church, a large traditional church undergoing transformation, a megachurch acting as a catalyst, and another large church spinning off a dedicated mission entity. 4 really different stories.
But what's fascinating is how the source material starts to pull out these common threads, these recurring principles that seem to show up again and again in this journey from, church to movement.
Let's try and synthesize those. What's the first big one?
Maybe the most foundational one is recognizing God's essential role. This whole shift becoming a Great Commission church focused on multiplication. It has to be a work of God.
Not just human effort.
Right. Our best strategies, our change management skills, our training programs, they're not enough on their own. God is the one who prepares hearts, connects people, initiates things, sustains the work. It really has to start there, acknowledging his sovereignty in it.
That definitely grounds everything. Okay, what's next? The source talks about external catalysts.
Yeah, this pattern shows up often. God frequently uses movement pioneers, people who might come from outside the specific church or organization.
Like David Brudrick with the Lighthouse.
Exactly. And their role seems to be critical. They often help feed a kind of holy discontent with just maintaining the status quo. They cast a clear, compelling vision of what could be. And crucially, they often bring simple, practical, reproducible methods like DBS that give people a way to actually start doing the work and stay focused.
Okay, so the catalyst role is key. But then you have to get the existing leadership on board, right?
Absolutely vital. Getting the formal leaders, the key influencers, to genuinely own this transition. It's non-negotiable for lasting change within an existing structure.
And the source suggests this isn't always easy.
It can be a painful journey sometimes. The vision needs to be clear, but it takes real humility and courage from leaders. The source even mentions a story where a catalyst was, speaking this movement language that the senior pastor admitted he didn't fully grasp.
Yeah.
But the pastor had the courage and humility to say, I don't understand everything you're saying, but I believe God is in this. Keep speaking that language. Don't stop. That kind of leadership is huge.
Wow, that takes trust. Okay, so leaders are on board, vision is clear. What's next? Training.
Widespread and practical training, yes. The tools for making disciples and multiplying groups need to be accessible to as many people as possible, not just a select few.
And frequent training.
The suggestion often is multiple touches, maybe 3 or more training sessions within about 6 months. And really importantly, opportunities to put it into practice almost immediately, not just theory.
Which leads to that principle about actually finding people of peace.
Right. This is where the rubber meets the road. Experienced trainers need to actually take people out into the community to practice.
Not just stay in the classroom.
Exactly. Go meet people. Genuinely listen to their needs. Offer to pray. Share your story. Share God's story. And the specific goal often is finding that one person, that one home that's open to hosting a simple discovery Bible study.
And the source acknowledges this is scary for people.
Oh yeah. Calls it terrifying for most folks, including leaders. But it also emphasizes that God meets us in our weakness when we step out in faith. And that experience of actually doing it, seeing God work, it transforms the disciple doing the outreach as much as anyone else.
Moves it from head knowledge to heart experience. Okay, another principle seems to be about embracing contribution, but not forcing everyone into the same mold.
Yeah, that's really important for unity, I think. Recognizing that not everyone is going to be ready or maybe even called to be a frontline DMM pioneer right away.
So don't force it.
Yeah. Don't force it. Instead, help people find meaningful ways they can contribute to the overall vision. Praying, supporting, encouraging, helping organize. Keep the focus on the main thing, the power of the gospel to change lives, rather than getting hung up on everyone having to do the exact same activity.
But at the same time, you do need to identify and really empower those who are ready to run with it.
Absolutely crucial. That smaller group will emerge the ones who really get it and start orienting their lives around multiplying disciples. Those are your early adopters.
And you can't always predict who they'll be.
As David Brudrick found, no. You train widely, you cast the vision, and then you watch who steps up and takes action. Their action is what validates the vision and builds that crucial momentum. And their stories, the stories of lives being changed through their efforts, are what build faith and answer the critics.
Okay, so you identify these early adopters. What then? Do they just go off on their own?
No, the sources really stress the importance of structure and accountability for them, forming them into teams.
Teams, white teams.
For encouragement, for mutual support, for learning together, and for accountability. Iron sharpens iron, right? The suggestion is often for these teams to meet regularly, maybe monthly for about 90 minutes.
And they focus on specific things in those meetings.
Yeah, the sources often mention a structure built around 4 key questions, all focused on reproduction.
What are those 4 questions?
Okay, first, what has God been doing? Specifically looking at reproduction gospel sharing, new disciples, new groups, or church formation. Celebrating the fruit.
Okay.
Second, where are you stuck? Again, focused on reproduction. What are the bottlenecks? What's hindering generational growth? Being honest about challenges.
Identifying problems.
Third, what 2 specific things do you need to do in the next week or 2 to move towards generational growth? So concrete action steps.
Planning the next steps.
And fourth, how can we pray for you? Covering each other in prayer, supporting each other spiritually.
That sounds like a really focused, practical meeting structure, keeping the main thing the main thing.
Exactly. And these teams, these early adopters, they often become the next wave of trainers themselves, maybe attending some mid-level training twice a year to deepen their skills and then passing it on.
So it builds capacity for more multiplication. Finally, the source seems to pull all this together into a kind of model, a picture of a Great Commission church working on multiple fronts.
Yeah, it synthesizes it into about 5 key areas of activity.
Okay, what are they?
First, equipping every single believer with the basics, not just the super keen ones. Every believer understanding loving obedience to Jesus, how to actively look for people open to the gospel, fishing, how to lead a simple DBS, how to share their story, how to pray for people. The goal is every disciple growing and reaching their own relational network.
Foundational level for everyone, okay?
Second, mobilizing dedicated teams. Those early adopters we talked about, sending them out intentionally to seek people of peace in specific communities or among specific unreached groups locally. They have those iron-on-iron accountability meetings and get that mid-level training.
So a more focused, intentional outreach force.
Third, keeping the end vision clear. Pursuing multiple streams of reproducing groups and churches that go down at least 4 generations. Aiming for that exponential movement-level growth, both locally and globally.
Keeping the big picture in mind.
Fourth, strategically partnering with specialized mission agencies. Recognizing the church can't do everything itself. Sending workers through agencies to reach places far beyond their immediate reach or expertise.
Leveraging partnerships.
And fifth, becoming a resource center to equip other churches. Sharing what they've learned, training leaders, coaching other congregations on how they too can become. Great Commission churches focused on multiplication, giving it away.
Wow. That's a really comprehensive picture. Equipping everyone, mobilizing teams, aiming for generations, partnering strategically, and equipping others.
It covers a lot of bases, moving from internal focus to outward multiplication at every level.
And the source wraps up this section with a really hopeful note, doesn't it? Circling back to Quasi and Global Harvest.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder. If that relatively small immigrant church, 40 people from 22 different nations, facing huge cultural challenges, if they could embrace these principles and start seeing multiplication,
then it's possible for others too.
That's the message. It's not fundamentally about the size of your church or your budget or your building initially. It's about shifting the focus, getting the right tools into people's hands, and equipping the ordinary people God has already given you.
So we've heard these incredible stories, unpack these principles. As you've been listening, what does this all mean for you?
Yeah, connecting it back, I think the big reflection here is that this transformation, this church to movement idea, it's not really about churches as, institutions or buildings in the end.
What is it about them?
It's fundamentally about people. Ordinary people being empowered by God, being equipped with simple tools, and then being released, sent out to make a real difference right where they are.
In their everyday lives.
Exactly. In their families, in their workplaces, in their neighborhoods, among the people they already know, and yes, sometimes intentionally going to find people they don't know yet who need the gospel.
And we saw that in the examples, didn't we? I mean, an 8-year-old girl.
A high-ranking police officer.
Farm laborers walking miles.
Inmates in maximum security. These aren't, seminary-trained professionals necessarily. They're just ordinary people who caught the vision and were given simple ways to act on it.
And those principles we pulled out, they point to that, don't they? The power of simple, doable methods like DBS.
The way stories build faith.
The importance of identifying and empowering those ready to act.
And the strength people find in those small, accountable teams doing it together.
So whether you're listening as part of a big church, a small group, or maybe you're just thinking about your own personal life and influence, These stories seem to show that real reproducing movement kicks off when individuals get equipped and sent out.
Not just gathered and maintained.
Exactly. We've taken a pretty deep dive today into these amazing stories. Churches starting that journey of transforming into movements.
From that small immigrant church finding incredible courage.
To large, established churches really rethinking their whole purpose, launching new things. The patterns seem consistent.
Yeah, this focus on equipping ordinary people, giving them simple, reproducible tools, and sending them out.
Into their communities, into the world.
And we saw it's not always easy. It takes courage. It takes humility. Persistence is key. But the core idea, it seems, is surprisingly simple.
Just enabling people.
Enabling people to share their faith naturally, start simple Bible studies with others who are seeking, and then empowering them to reproduce disciples who do the same thing. It's much less about maintaining an institution.
And much more about multiplication.
Multiplication, powered by God working through his people.
It really does make you stop and think, doesn't it? About the potential that's there, maybe untapped, when the focus shifts outward like that.
It really does. And maybe it raises a final question for you, listening right now. The ultimate goal is to see these reproducing streams of disciples, these groups reaching people all around you. What could be the very first, maybe very simple step you could take based on everything we've explored today?
A great question to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.